These animals are like ghosts.
This is the Florida Everglades, and a massive effort is underway to recover one of the most endangered animals on Earth, the Florida panther.
It's absolute stealth. It's quiet. It's lethal.
As Florida was settled, the panther, a kind of cougar or mountain lion, was considered a threat to people and cattle.
It's a pioneer that can travel hundreds of miles.
At present, there are so few panthers that extinction could be just around the corner.
We're destroying so many of the natural habitats of the world that the species extinction rate is now estimated to have increased to as much as 1,000 times over what it occurred before humankind came along.
There could be a panther sitting beneath this palm staring at us right now, and we would have no idea that it's there.
There's considerable danger and concern anytime you capture and manipulate a wild animal. If we can cause one litter of kittens to survive, we've increased the population by 10%.
The last survivors lived deep in the swamp, in areas for which man had little use.
And it's an emblem of a wildness, and it's survived over millennia. These truly wild spaces that we need to help save ourselves. Morning, Betty.
Morning.
Did you manage to keep the feet dry?
Yep, for now. We call this area Kai Hayadle, which is shimmering waters. The sun shining on the water and with this wind blowing, the water rippling, and the water just shimmering and sparkling like little diamonds. You know, I'm in an airboat, but I was like, what if I was in a dugout canoe and this is what I saw for miles and miles and miles? Because maybe eventually it could return to what my ancestors saw. On a lot of these tree islands, we put our ancestors to rest. So our ancestors' DNA is in that tree. That's what we mean when we're a part of the land. It flows in your blood veins.
It's crazy to think that there was a panther right here.
It is. There's not really any land in there.
Wow.
You can tell that's supposed to be high ground because of that tree.
This is the video from this exact spot.
You can see here the dry ground in here, so the water was much lower than it is now. So he wouldn't have any problems going from island to island and making his way here.
See, if I could find just a little piece of dry land, I'd want to put a camera trap there.
Just ease your way in there, because you don't know what's down there. You can't see.
If the big python gets me, will you come rescue me?
I'll film it.
That was such a perfect answer. I hope I get to meet Betty Osceola someday. She's fantastic. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And thanks to the Florida Film Festival for organizing this forum. I think it's a really cool opportunity, as a part of the larger activity in the festival. So we're glad to be here. I feel super privileged to not only get to be part of this project, but to moderate this panel today. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, I'd love to invite Jen Korn to come up. Jen is also featured in the film. We may see a second clip with her in just a little bit. She is an expert on the Florida Panther and is an important part of the story. Tori Linder is one of the producers in the film. Yeah, please. They all deserve lots of applause. Tori is one of the producers in the film and has really propelled the whole project forward. All the loose ends and challenges, she's constantly driving it forward. Carlton Ward Jr., come on up, who's featured in the film as well, and photographer with National Geographic and producer in the film. And the director of the film, Eric Bendick, come on up. Eric has a film company called Grizzly Creek Films, and he and his team have done an amazing job. So I guess maybe I should sit. Do I look like I'm in timeout over here? That's cool. Well, so maybe to start off, the title of this forum is sort of the uncertainty, and I think there's sort of two areas of uncertainty that we wanted to focus on. One is the actual production, and I think that's true in any creative work. Like, it's just true in life. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes or tomorrow or whatever. It's true in a creative process, but I think the film team chose a path of filmmaking that is fraught with uncertainty and challenges. And you saw in the beginning, if you notice, some of the equipment that was being put together was creating what's called camera traps. And so I'd love to maybe start off with Carlton, if you could just tell us a little bit about that method and why that was important to this particular story.
I have some PTSD from dealing with those things for so many years, as does our whole team. So I have that locked off deep in the recesses in my brain somewhere. I have to access for a minute.
Feel free to delegate too.
No, it's the Florida Panther is such an elusive animal, and there's only 200 of them spread across millions of acres. They're active mainly at night. They're primarily in wooded and forested areas or in tall grass. And all the time that I've spent out there in the woods, I've only seen 2 for certain with my own eyes, maybe 3. And so the prospect of getting enough photography or video to sustain a film or even a magazine story or anything about the Florida Panther holding a camera in your hands, it's just not possible. So the camera trap allows you to set up studio quality photography or video in a waterproof box on a trail in the woods, and by working with a scientist like Jen, you get a good sense of where the panthers might be moving, and then kind of combine that information with selecting your background, trying to find a sense of place so it'll communicate something about where the panther lives, and then waiting and getting lucky, because you're up against every curious cow or curious bear that comes by. You're up against hurricanes and elements, and yeah, they're supposed to be waterproof. Yeah. So so that's a good question. So we use camera traps, a certain kind, to produce professional video and photo. Jen uses them for science. So maybe you can add a little bit about the role of camera traps, and her work informs the ability to do this work.
I can't imagine I need a microphone. I'm pretty loud, but I'll scoot up here. So, they're an invaluable tool to be able to monitor all sorts of wildlife, because you can't always be out there, even though, that's what I prefer, is to be out in the field, and I am a lot, but it's not realistic that I'm going to be there at night or, first thing in the morning or it's just not going to happen. So they help us to be able to, are animals present in an area where we didn't know they were before? It can also help to be able to come up with population numbers, population estimates. And the state agencies, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, has used them for that to help to update panther population numbers. So it's an invaluable tool. And I'm not using the fancy ones that Carlton does, their regular game cameras, but they can still be very pricey, and it can still really, get you when they get destroyed by a bear or water or humans. They like to take them or destroy them as well. But yeah, I mean, so I've been doing this for a long time. And I remember when I first started using remote cameras in South Texas, they were definitely not the quality that they are now. But so they've come a long way, even just using store-bought ones. So yeah, they're fantastic.
I'll just add from a production standpoint, the challenges of not only capturing footage, but actually being present with a team to capture characters like Jen and Carlton capturing footage. So if you think about the workflow of this process, it's a 99% failure when they're out there checking cameras. This is just week in, week out, complete grind of going in the field, fixing things, troubleshooting things, cameras not working, cameras underwater, cameras been stolen, been shot one time. I mean, literally, this is one of the most unpredictable things that you could ever do. And then having from our side, the team that's ready to capture them in the moment where they experience, something actually happening. And so the odds of that are very, very low. And I think what we're after right now on the frontier of documentary filmmaking are stories that are captivating because they're also sort of unrepeatable. You saw Alex Honnold climbing El Cap unroped in free solo, and it's unrepeatable. There's not another person that can be in that situation and be filmed doing that, and you can't tell that story again. Those pieces are never going to come together. So what attracted to us, but also was terrifying about this whole process, was we were going to follow this team and see what happened and see what unfolded. And it was going to be unrepeatable. There was no other team that could go out and be in a position to do the type of work that the Path of the Panther team did day in, day out for 5 years, and also be in a position to capture those moments. And I would say that all things that we could control, we did, and we were still extremely lucky to capture what we did when we did. There are many moments that I can point back to that things just lined up, and we just happened to be there for, kind of moment after moment where we could tell a compelling story. And there easily could have been so many of those moments that we just never saw, never were in position to capture, or just didn't have the ability to be there on the ground with these guys. And also I have to thank Ted and Sig, because as producers on the film, there was that trust that the team's going to go out, we don't know what's going to happen, and we're going to live with that uncertainty. So that was a really special thing about this team, is that everyone trusted one another through that process. So that's been really rewarding, and I think so cool to share that with the world now.
Yeah, I would just say, obviously it worked. There's a film and it premiered. I don't know if anyone's seen it yet, but I know some of us saw it. And there's an encore screening tomorrow, and there'll be lots of opportunities in the days and months ahead. Yeah. Carlton, Jen, Eric, you all are like a great photographer, scientist, filmmaker, and you're used to working, interacting in spaces with other people and accomplishing great work. But you chose a path that is basically telling a story about what happens when we're not around. So how do you do that? Because the human presence just makes it impossible. So that's a real unique challenge, and you've done an awesome job solving for that. Tori, anything you want to add from just sort of a production standpoint, like challenges, obstacles that made this inherently unpredictable? I can come back to you later.
Seemingly endless number of them. That's why.
Where do we begin?
I'm racking my brain.
Because you're driving the relationships, partnerships, funding, things like that. It puts you in a tough spot to sell an idea.
Well, and also still doing quite a bit of it from the swamp. I was recently looking through a lot of our behind the scenes photos from these productions, and there's a really funny one where I'm on a conference call, and I distinctly remember this moment that I'm like chest deep in black water and a log drops behind me and someone's like, "What's that background noise?" And I was like, "Oh, nothing. I think the neighbor's working on the lawn." But the fascinating part from my perspective about this whole experience is that our team at the Path of the Panther project, yes, we are all full-time storytellers and have been working 110% to tell the story of the Florida panther, but we're also full-time conservationists. And so concurrently, we've been working on the ground to advance the narrative of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, both in our local communities and in Tallahassee. And so I think when I look back on this experience, it was a fascinating process to be in both those two worlds of how do we capture these moments, how do we let those that call this or propel those who call this landscape home in telling their own stories, while also ensuring we're keeping an eye on the fact that we're losing anywhere from 6 to 12 acres an hour to development in Florida, and every minute, every hour, every day adds up quite quickly.
I'll add that Carlton and I went into this not having a clear idea of how long or what the scope of the story was, and we initially thought we'll see what kind of footage we can get, what kind of photography, but our initial reference was, let's try and make a television show, 40 minutes, an hour, something that captured the ethos of the swamp, but really was more sort of like, just on the surface level of what was going on. And I distinctly remember a moment when Tori joined our team and when we started to think bigger. And Tori was a huge motivating force in us thinking beyond that frame and actually starting to embrace something much, much bigger and much more challenging as a result. But there would not be a feature film if Tori hadn't basically said, you guys are on this track, and consistently asking for us to at least consider to raise the bar, because it is an enormous jump from where we came in with our expectations to where we are now. And that team had to really come together to make that happen. And to a degree, I didn't know if it was possible. For a long time, I didn't know if it was possible. You reflect on that at all, Carlton?
Well, I think we often recognize like how patient our executive producers, such as Ted and the Haddocks and Siggy and the Tikis, had to be on the timeline of this. I mean, you can't schedule that appointment with that first female panther in north of the Caloosahatchee River. It just happens, and it takes a long time. And Tori, on the conservation impact side, had to her patience was tested also, because we're up against trying to make change in Tallahassee, and do we wrap the story as the best we have in 2019 and get something out there, or do we let it keep unfolding? And these are not easy decisions. Like, because it can't go to work for you in the world until it's in the world. And so we were able to kind of hybridize that a little bit by keeping the eye on the feature, which could have the biggest impact, but then also developing all of our photographic and ancillary and other communications to keep kind of trying to serve other needs along the way. And it's not the time to answer it at this moment, but Tori can talk more about. We developed a whole separate film to try to push some impact objectives that allowed us to keep pushing those on a certain timeline while giving this film the space to take its current form.
Eric, do we have a second clip? Do we want to show?
Sure. Yeah.
Anything you want to say to set this up?
Well, we saw kind of that initial scene was Carlton building camera traps. What you didn't see was the motivation for that scene was actually further along in the film, a hurricane had wiped out all of his systems pretty much, and they were in ruins. And this gives you another behind the scenes glimpse of what can happen out there in the wild, and then also one of the big turning points for us as a team, and really the moment I think we knew we had a feature film.
Audio.
Yeah, we have some audio.
Bear with us.
Background and
We have a live.
I know. I think the bear scene is funny enough. It'll translate with or without. This has been a week of AV challenges, so fitting ending.
The soundtrack is beautiful. You can hear a little bit of it right here. Great audio mix with all these live sounds. And if you haven't seen it yet, it just does transport you out into these swampy areas around the Everglades. All right, we're going to give it another shot.
I'm saying, oh man, I'm excited to see what's in here. Oh no, I'm mad. A bear got this one.
We can continue the conversation if, unless you want to give it another shot.
I can try one more option. You guys keep talking. I'll get
Okay.
this right.
Let's see. Jen, can you tell us a little bit about, just for those of us who haven't seen the film, can you give us a context sort of in geography about where the panther population is and where we'd like to see it go? Because I think that kind of mental picture will be helpful.
Yep. So, what we call our Florida panther is basically just a mountain lion, cougar, puma. They are currently still classified as a separate subspecies. They're federally endangered. And, they used to range across the entire southeast of the US, but we have basically restricted the breeding population to primarily down southwest Florida, south of the Caloosahatchee River. And for years, males had been getting across the Caloosahatchee to get up into kind of south central Florida, sometimes even north of I-4. So we knew that there were males doing that, even all the way up to southern Georgia one time that was illegally shot by a hunter. But we hadn't seen a female panther north of the river since 1972, when the houndsman that works with FWC treed one in Glades County. I moved here in 2013 from Texas to work for the state as a panther biologist. And I knew this whole background, but I was the first panther biologist stationed up there north of the river. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to find a female. I mean, obviously, I have no idea. I mean, being very kind of egotistical, but I don't know. I just felt like it was the time. Things were going to change. Because females are capable of covering distances. These cats are capable of swimming a river. It's just that typically females don't traverse those kind of distances. Typically, they stay somewhere near where they were born, set up a home range. And the Caloosahatchee River is not what it was. We have dredged it, and it is wide and deep and steep. And, even though they are capable of doing it, it's still a barrier. It's not as permeable as it used to be. So in 2015, actually, so I had cameras that I had placed over 14 counties between the Caloosahatchee River and I-4 to monitor for panthers north of the river. So I had one camera on Babcock Ranch Preserve, which is something like 78,000 acres, and I had one camera there. And I'd been getting a picture of a male for a long time, and I got pictures of what looked like a female. The body shape, they're different, they're more dainty, but it wasn't that the cat had turned around and lifted its tail up and given me a perfect view or anything. So I couldn't be absolutely certain, but I shared it with the other panther biologists. We all kind of thought, wow, that looks suspect. So another biologist, Brian, came up there. We put a ton more cameras, and it still took a while. It wasn't until 2016 that we got another photo as well as some tracks, and were able to say definitively that this was the first female panther detected north of the Caloosahatchee River since 1972. I mean, it was a huge, everybody was just, we couldn't believe it had happened. And it was something that kind of, I had met Carlton before, and I can't remember where we first met, fortunately, but so I knew him, and
2015 expedition.
What's it?
Maybe.
I can't remember, but somehow we got, hooked up again to where, come out, put cameras, try to get this, additional footage of this first female and maybe even kittens, and really kind of dovetailed a lot of it into what ended up being this feature film. I had no idea, what was going to happen when we first went out there, but a huge part of the film, finding this female north of the river. Did you get it, Dylan?
Third time's a charm, so we'll cross our fingers. I think we got it.
I have a lot of anticipation of this particular shot. It's one of the most important of my efforts because it'll place a panther in a landscape that could be nowhere else in the country other than South Florida. I'm getting kind of anxious to see what's on here now. Anticipation. This camera has been bumped more than I just did. Okay, let's see what we have here. Oh, yeah, there's a bear. Bear cub. Kick-ass backlight. Oh, come on, cub, stick your nose up. Damn. The camera's pointed straight at the ground. this is going to be underwater any month now. And so my chance to get this shot could be over for another year.
To put out a camera and to wait a full month to go back to check the pictures to realize the bears came and wrecked the camera the day after you changed the battery 29 days ago, it's the type of thing that makes you want to just throw in the towel.
Nothing. Nothing. Getting emotional. Sorry, it's been a long couple years, a long few months. Thinking about all the time. Left flash, not firing. Rebuild lens hood for next visit. Pray for Panther.
There's a few along here.
Tracks?
Mm-hmm. Here's one. Some nice tracks.
That's awesome.
I knew from when I was a little kid that I wanted to work with cats. I mean, there's just something that draws me to them. It sounds odd, but like I do feel like I have this connection.
I think this road looks good. It's a lot of wet areas still on either side, so it's really the best way to travel east and west through this side of the swamp.
Which one did you want to check first? We got how many here? 4?
Let's check the video camera.
Okay.
There we are. So we've had nothing break the beam since last Friday. Oh my gosh.
Look at that. Oh my gosh.
She's amazing.
She's a pioneer. She swam the river.
Yep. The hope.
She has this graceful elegance to her. This female had the tenacity to cross that barrier and set up a territory in this new place. All of a sudden, it's happening in real time. The stakes could not be higher.
Since this female is on Babcock Ranch, we've been referring to her as Babs.
– 11 in the morning, 2 a.m. Panther.
The male up here at Babcock Ranch has this big, blocky head. Is impressive. And you just see the rippling of the muscles. An unimaginable strength in that animal.
They know how to sense each other and they know how to smell the marks that they leave. So she knew there was, at least one male here. So she's got potential mates.
To have a breeding female and new generations of panthers being born here will bring this whole system back into balance.
Incredible turning point in conservation history, going back 40, close to 50 years. I'm not an expert in this, so correct me if I'm getting the numbers off, but in the 70s, you mentioned we hadn't seen a female north of the Clusatchie River, which means population shrinking, and they're not getting into that territory north where we want to see it expand. And I think the population is down to about 10 panthers.
At least 20 or 30.
20, 30.
In the 80s and 90s is what
Okay.
it got down to. So very
But-
small, inbred, breeding with related individuals.
So 20 or 30 total left in the world. So that's maybe a big classroom at school, but not a global population. So we're seeing that grow, and this is the turning point that gives us hope. And it was captured on film. Jen, you discovered it first, and then this moment erupts in the film where the viewer discovers this, and so super exciting. I don't know. You're the panel. I'm the one talking because I'm excited. Tori, tell us what the significance of this moment.
I mean, massively significant, I will say, to see a big cat making a recovery in a time when big cats across the globe are in decline. I moved back to work on this story and just to start the Path of the Panther project as a larger, broader impact campaign, actually from sub-Saharan Africa. I was working in Eastern and Southern Africa for Conservation International, where though the work underway was so incredibly exciting, it was being done in the face of natural resource-based conflict, and it felt like we were getting a lot of sad news day in and day out for the species that called that landscape home. And so to find such an optimistic story in our own backyard and really a challenge for Floridians, can we rise to meet the recovery of the Florida panther? Can we have the third most populated state in the nation and also sustain wildlife of this magnitude? It's certainly what has fueled me every single day for the past 4.5 years. But just a quick point I wanted to add, watching that clip that I should have mentioned during the camera trap question, is that our team broadly had plus or minus 24 camera trap systems going across the greater Everglades ecosystem throughout this process. And that is more than one individual or really even two can manage at any moment within the constraints of everything else required to produce a film and sustain a project. These moments you're seeing on the screen have also been made possible thanks to people who unfortunately are not in the room this morning, but I want to give a big shout out to the 5 individuals who've worked on these camera trap systems at different times over the last 4.5 years. Leah Burtis, Lauren Yoho, Alex Fries, Mary Helen Roeder, and most recently George McKenzie Jr. They have the very fun and exciting, though at times exhausting jobs of getting out and servicing these systems and making sure they're operating so that a battery doesn't die moments before a panther walks out in perfect lighting. And this film was really made possible thanks to their hard work as well.
That's great. I want to talk just briefly about the development of the story and then get into more of the challenges of making a change in the world and opportunities for what that looks like moving forward. So, Eric, anything you want to mention about what you mentioned earlier, that this started out as like a 30-40 minute thing, which is basically a short film or a TV episode, and then you went this longer format. So what were the things that sort of drove that decision, and what surprises did you discover along the way that you didn't know ahead of time?
One of the biggest things, so this was a signature moment here that was happening in the wild. And, we all are familiar with kind of blue chip wildlife documentary where the natural world looks very pristine. It's almost untouchably beautiful. You don't see a lot of humans in it. That's one of the kind of systemic problems with, the formats, the global format of wildlife, is that while we all know these systems are in trouble, there's a huge amount out there that would show you otherwise, that would show you all this beauty and never talk about the human side. So concurrently with the discovery of Babs, basically within the same 12-month period, the big revelation was what was happening not in the wild. There was a massive proposed toll road system that was really aimed right at the exact same place where she was potentially recovering. And so it was that flip side of the prospect where we knew if we were going to go down a path of a traditional wildlife documentary, you would never mention the toll road, you'd never mention the human side, and you would never talk about those choices. But that was so present and such an obvious threat and such a blind spot for the film, for us not to address it and for us not to take that story would have felt like we were turning our backs on Babs and Panthers and that whole prospect of a future for wild Florida. So it almost felt like we had no choice at that point because there was this very clear, very present threat. And from that point forward, I think we were all very committed to the feature. And we were prepared to weather hurricanes or the neurological disease that came later in the story. All of these threats we wanted to incorporate into the story and not ignore that human side of things. And that's why the story reflects both of those sides. And hopefully that's where change can happen, because we're really trying to show not this pristine place, not this place that's timeless. It's really up to all of us to ensure that these animals survive and really the whole ecosystem.
I'd like to add just a couple thoughts there. We're talking about the uncertainty in the process and all this. We're motivated by conservation, and we're doing this to try to have impact. And this is a place where, earlier in the project, we could have received a certain amount of money from a couple different networks we were talking to dumb this down into a 45 to 50 minute natural history production and put it on TV and get a check and move on. That wasn't an acceptable path, because the responsibility of telling this story, the responsibility of people like Jen who've put their careers to this, and the responsibility to the ranchers and everyone invested, and to make the first film of this scale about the Florida panther. It holds a certain responsibility, but there's not a predetermined space for a film like that. It's like we can't just go to, at the time, Netflix and other places are looking for blue chip natural history, and then there's a certain formula for TV to tell the story we needed to tell. You have to almost build your own space for it, and that took a lot more risk, a lot more investment from our sponsors, a lot more patience for everyone here and our families. But that's kind of one of those spectrum of decisions we had to kind of navigate kind of midway through the project. And that's where, as Eric mentioned, when Tori was really adding momentum to this, we all collectively decided it was worth the risk. We were gonna tell the story that we felt needed to be told, and accept the uncertainty that came with it.
Go ahead, Jen.
I'll just add on to the whole uncertainty thing. I spoke a minute ago about kind of like where panthers are in Florida. So, and obviously a lot of the footage and things that Carlton did were down south. Fakahatchee's a fantastic place to be able to get footage of panthers and bears. And then when we come north of the river, obviously there are, a lot fewer. So the possibilities go down. So I don't know if y'all ever knew this, but I feel a lot of pressure as like the scientist and the expert to like provide the spot that's going to produce this wonderful picture of a panther. And when it doesn't happen, I'm kind of like, oh my goodness, I did that wrong. I mean, obviously I can't control what these animals do, but I do feel that sometimes, like, I hope they show up like they're supposed to, because a lot of thought goes into where do you put a camera? Where's going to be the trail that's fantastic. It's two trails that come together. I mean, all these things that go into it, but you still just don't know if an animal is going to come by. So add in just their individual behavior, but then the fact that a lot of the story happened north of the river where there's just fewer of them. So I'm glad that it ended up all working out and I didn't fail in my job there, but and then throw in hurricanes and toll roads and all of these things too. So
I never even crossed my mind to blame you for any of our failings. So I'm glad you're so conscientious, but
what was so cool though was that Jen had this like sixth sense for Babs, and every time we were in that environment with Babs, you could tell that like her spidey sense would be like giving her this information, and a lot of it was gut based, I think, but science as well based, and that was super cool just for us as a film team too, because that dynamic of problem solving that you guys were working out, and the idea that we were capturing that uncertainty, but also just the connection that you can have with an animal like that was, I feel like, very real. I don't know if you can reflect on where that comes from, but
and I mean, I didn't realize it's nerdy or geeky or whatever, but I mean, and you saw briefly in the film, but I really have, since I was a little kid, wanted to be a cat biologist. I mean, as silly as that may sound, but I mean, I just always knew that's what I wanted to do, and I by no means think I'm like the world expert or anything like that, but the things that I do, I'm very passionate about, I care about, and I'm always wanting to learn more about. I'm always open to that as well. So, I mean, I just get immersed into it, and it helps when you're surrounded by people like this who also feed into it. I mean, I get a lot of comments about how well Carlton and I interact in the film, and it's because we're both the same kind of personality. We just geek out on like a little bit different things, but they mesh. So he's geeking out on his like all the technology with his camera traps and getting that perfect picture and all the conservation and the corridor and all these things, and I'm like just geeking out on the cats. And so then it just feeds into each other. So it works out really well. And hopefully, I mean, everybody enjoyed it. I think it did.
One of the things that I think that is super valuable about Jen's perspective, and I don't think, it would be the same in the film, is that there are a lot of people who might look at a panther and say, well, that's kind of scary. I don't know if I'd want to run into that in the woods. But Jen, the way that she understands the animal, the way that she empathizes with the animal, allows you a totally different perspective about this animal just trying to survive in her home, trying to raise a family, trying to do what we do as humans. And that gives you access to, really the animal as an individual. And I don't think we would have that without her point of view.
And just one last comment, which I guess is a continual thread for me, but as most of you know, it's hard to include everyone in a well-told story, which is a really hard part of living this story and then getting it out in the world. And when I stop and reflect on all the scientists and biologists and conservationists that have helped make this film possible, again, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, there are dozens of individuals who went beyond the extra mile to help enable telling the story. And we have so much gratitude for their time and energy.
Yeah, there is a core team of panther biologists at the state because I've actually left working at the state about 5 years ago and went to a private company. So yes, I still am a panther biologist because that's my specialty, but the state panther biologists are different individuals based out of Naples, and they probably, they tease me about all this kind of stuff, but obviously they're doing this on a day-to-day basis. They're making all this stuff happen, and they don't always get the FaceTime because of, it just doesn't work in their schedules, or maybe the agency doesn't, want to get into all that. So it can be tough for them to sometimes be involved, but they're the ones like down there and then giving me a hard time for being like the face of it.
Not at all, but a lot of heroes in this state is all.
I want to ask you guys one more question, and if we have time still, and nobody needs to stretch your legs quite yet, we can ask some questions from the audience. So I would just maybe I'll make one comment and one question to kind of go along with it. Like, I know we've worked so much together in this process. I know your heart in this and your sort of the mission that you're alluding to. It's fairly clear from watching the film, but again, I know everyone in the room hasn't seen it yet. So some people might make the assumption that, this is something I've learned in the process of this film, is that, 50, 100 years ago or more, there's just so much space. And, there was space for humans, there's space for wild animals, and now there's just like, it's overlapping. And so how do we deal with that? And so there could be this sort of, I would think, a false dichotomy of like, well, it's you pick. What do you want? You want one or the other? But I feel like that's a little bit of a myth, and I think your film is addressing that somewhat. I wondered if you, because I know you're not anti-development. It's about making wise choices and innovative choices, things that we haven't had to do before. So talk a little bit about the sort of the mission of the film, and then the impact that you hope it will have in the days and months and years coming up. You've been working on this for years, and this is like the first week of putting it into action. So what's coming ahead from the mission of this film?
First week of putting it into action, and we also decided to host a summit with 300 people from across the state on the corridor. So we're all. It's been a busy one, but a great one. So as Ted just so eloquently articulated, I think it's pretty plain to all of us that call Florida home that over the last decades, we've seen a lot of change here. State of Florida is gaining on average 1,000 residents a day, and we're growing and developing to welcome those new residents. What we've been advocating for with both the Path of the Panther project and this film is the protection and safeguarding of the natural resources and green infrastructure that makes our life in this state sustainable, both for us as two-legged creatures, but also the four-legged creatures you see in this film. So specifically the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which is an 18 million acre network of private and public lands spanning from Florida Bay in the south to the Georgia and Alabama borders. Thanks to the incredibly strong legacy of conservation here in the state, we're already looking at 10 million acres protected. That's exciting and an achievement, especially when you look at states like Texas that are less than 4% protected. But if we don't protect those remaining 8 million acres of opportunity areas within the corridor, we are, in a very real sense, looking at a potential future where the Greater Everglades ecosystem is no longer connected to North America, where we are losing valuable resources like aquifer recharge and fresh drinking water, but also, as it's highlighted in this film, economy. Agriculture and tourism remain the leading drivers of our state's economy, and they are dependent on these natural, wild, undeveloped areas, as well as obviously connection for our wide-ranging species like the Florida black bear and the Florida panther. And so, as you'll see in the film, we had some really great progress in the last couple of years. In 2020, 2021, we brought the story of the Florida Panther to Tallahassee in an impact campaign made possible by conservation partners across the state, as well as support from the National Geographic Society. And we were able to successfully pass the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act with bipartisan unanimous support. And a very exciting moment marking the beginning of great support from our leadership in the state and continuation of the work that land trust and conservation organizations have been doing. Now the challenge before us with this film, we've gone the extra mile, as Eric and Carlton articulated, to really make this a feature film because we believed in this story and we felt a responsibility to it. But now the work begins of getting it out and making sure all Floridians, one, are aware we still have a Florida Panther. It's our state animal, but I'm not sure I realized the recovery they were making a decade ago. And two, how they can get involved to make a change. So I will add, if any of you would like to get involved with that process, please come and find us. We're really excited to be kicking off a tour this fall, bringing this film across our state and to keep places across the country with the hope of helping to inspire other states in following suit. Florida is certainly not alone in these challenges or the need for a wildlife corridor.
Yeah, we want everyone in this state to meet the Florida Panther, to understand that it's not a black panther, but also to really, through that lens, see the whole state in a different way and see this possibility for connectivity throughout the state through the corridor. And as Tori said, it's really just the beginning. The panther is really the puma. The puma is beyond Florida. It's throughout the entire continent. So our goal is to continue that journey from Florida up the East Coast, through the Appalachians, and then ultimately, the idea in the film, the idea that Florida is pioneering right now could be a model for the whole continent, could be a global model as well. So I think it's up to, people like yourselves to help amplify that message, because there's a lot of work we can do with the tour, but really it's getting this idea off of an idea on a map and making it something real. And a long time ago, someone took an idea called the national parks and put those on a map, but they made it real. And so like the next 20 years is really about making this idea real, not something just that's exciting to talk about, but it's actual geography, actual space. And I think Carlton can reflect on that also.
Well, I won't say too much because I want to save time for questions, and I think you and Tori covered the motivations really well. But from my kind of personal journey into all this, it started with the wildlife corridor first. That was what I was wanting to raise awareness for, and that led to the Florida Panther as a character for that story. We had done expeditions through Florida to try to raise awareness for this wildlife corridor that's still here and still exists. And after the second big expedition in 2015, and Eric's team at Grizzly Creek Films made a good PBS film about that called The Forgotten Coast. I went to my editors at National Geographic, really excited to now try to do a magazine story about the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And they basically told me no. They said, I don't think that fits what we're looking for, but we might be interested in the story of the Florida Panther. And you can use the story of the Panther to tell the story of the corridor. So it's like one of those kind of really frustrating conversations, because I went there all bright-eyed and yeah, I'm going to do a story. And then it's but 15-minute conversation pivots to a 5-year obsession to try to get a National Geographic magazine story on the Panther. But she was right, because we've been talking about the Florida Wildlife Corridor for a long time. And did a good job in getting stakeholders interested and landowners and people who already care about things like wildlife corridors. Well, bringing the Florida Panther in as a character opens up the conversation to a whole nother level of people. And that's what we're super excited about. We got to test that theory with the magazine and with the National Geographic magazine article, and it did. It generated new excitement about the corridor with the people who saw the magazine. With this film, we're gonna take that reach tenfold or greater. And so really excited to see about, yes, people knowing about the Panther, but if they leave the theater or leave their eventual watching it on TV experience, knowing about the Florida Wildlife Corridor and caring about it, then we've really accomplished our mission.
That's great. I'm particularly inspired by the idea of not only the Florida Wildlife Corridor, but that as a model that becomes a national model, because animals do not recognize state lines. They didn't study that in their geography class. So, it's like they have certain habitat, and that stretches where it stretches. And so what we really need is regional or national corridors. So those conversations have already begun, and they're just going to need a lot of us in our community and surrounding communities to fan the flames of interest in that. So be on the lookout for those opportunities coming up. I know the filmmakers will tell you ways to do that, but maybe we pause for a minute and see if there's any questions. Yes.
I don't want to make too great a departure from the filmmaking component of this, but you have the vehicle now to tell the message. You have received funding largely from the legislature and from other sources to acquire the land. I'm curious what you think a third component is as far as a variable. How important now is time a factor in it?
The question is, what's the time factor here? If correct me if I'm wrong, if it relates to legislation. We're on the clock. Yeah. What's the time element here?
We're on the clock. I'm happy to start this one and defer to Jen on things specific for the Panther, and I'm sure Carlton and Eric will have comments. But together with partners, an economic study was recently commissioned by a global management consulting firm, really taking a deep dive into looking at the reality of how much time that we have. And the results from that made it quite clear that the next decade will decide the future for wild Florida. It only gets more expensive each and every day to accomplish this. And to take a little bit of a step back when we talk about protecting these remaining 8 million acres in the Florida Wildlife Corridor, we're not referring to directly going out and acquiring each of those as a state park or a national park or a preserve, as we would traditionally think. In large part, what we're referencing is a mechanism called a conservation easement, which allows many of these lands, which are working lands, ranches, citrus groves, timberlands, it allows them to remain working while ensuring they're protected into perpetuity from development. And so, the short and simple answer there is that the next decade will decide the future of this cause. I had one of those consultants remind me this week that in the course of 3 days, we should be protecting 1,000 acres to rise to that challenge. So we have quite a bit before us, but we've had some great successes. This year, as you mentioned, the Florida legislature committed $300 million last legislative session to land conservation within the corridor. If the governor signs the budget into law as it stands, we're going to have another exciting contribution this year through the Florida Forever and Rural and Family Lands programs. But we have to keep that public pressure on. And we also have to look at innovative ways that the private sector and kind of more untraditional conservation allies can get involved in rising to this moment. Carlton, please elaborate as well.
Well, we're fresh off of 3 days at this big Florida Wildlife Corridor Summit, and so a lot of these things are in my mind. And that big economic study that Tori initiated really helped frame out this, and so the next decade is the pivotal decade, and they broke it down into the pace of conservation that's needed, and that's about 10,000 acres a month. There's 960,000 acres in what they call Horizon 1 lands. It's a combination of the most important and the most threatened, and they factor those two things together. And a lot of it's going to look like conservation from the past decade, where you're saving a beautiful wild place, but some of it might be quite different, where you're saving a sod farm or a cattle pasture next to a road because it is the last bottleneck. It's the last connective tissue in a corridor somewhere. And these things are, as Tori said, are only getting more expensive. So it definitely is about time. Thankfully, we've made great progress in the state, and our state leadership is aligned, at least for the next year or two. But this Panther film will be really important for sustaining that enthusiasm as we share it with elected officials as a point of pride next year. It'll also be important for creating enthusiasm, but more, and from my Floridian perspective, focusing enthusiasm from the federal government, because the federal government has already stated objectives for trying to protect 30% of the country by 2030. And we need them to know that we have a great plan in place here in Florida and would gladly take a high percentage of those dollars to fulfill this job. So those are some of the places where I think we can really add value and advance that agenda with this film.
Thank you. Good question. Yes.
I was wondering if you could speak about the editing of this film and just sort of the influence it had on the story.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Well, it was a very long edit. Not only because we had so much from the field, years of footage, incredible archive of natural history footage and camera trap footage. So all of that had to be organized and then, kind of sorted through, and it were those select moments that fit the story. We tried not to just pick something that looked fantastic or had some, beautiful natural history if it didn't fit the story. So the main thing was that just really adhering to ideas and thoughts that would complement the story throughout. And that story evolved. You saw Betty Osceola in the beginning. We needed to elevate the story in key moments. In her particular case, we knew that there was this tension between South Florida and the Everglades, where panthers have always been in their core habitat, versus this idea of panthers moving north. And through her voice, that really becomes clear in the film that panthers are losing one homeland and gaining another homeland. So as much as we could, we tried to figure out those key ideas in the edit and in the story, and continue to build them throughout. So homeland is a really important theme for us. Losing a home, gaining a home, and what it means for an indigenous person to be in their homeland, what it means for Carlton and his heritage to be on ranching lands and in that homeland. And so there were kind of like these themes that we identified as core to the story, and then it was a lot of Tetris to figure out which moments would take you to the next chronology of the story, and some of that is not linear. And I think that as filmmakers and in documentary, there's a sort of a tension between how did the story literally play out in time, and then how does that map to the story that emotionally you want to play out for an audience. And I think that the freedom to have some flexibility allows you to really make the story arc more powerful. And so I think that you have to be authentic to the story. You have to have authenticity in characters, in moments. But I also think that, you've got to have freedom. Because for an audience coming into the story, it's important that they're tracking character development the whole time. And so even when we talk about edit, there are things that really it was about listening when we got far enough along. That someone who would work on the score would say, I feel this is happening. And then you just dial in closer and closer to that character arc and that story arc, and just continuing to listen from our team.
Thanks, Eric. I see some more hands. Let's go here first, and then we'll.
I'll just add a really brief note there too. It's like it was so valuable to have fresh eyes on this in the later stages, because we had lived this story inside it for 5 years, so we don't necessarily see it the way an audience reads it. And so we evolved with it, and so getting those notes and getting that feedback from our executive producers, from colleagues, from even like Eric said, the sound guy, it helps you see things you didn't see before. And we'll probably see a few of those things when we watch it tomorrow night that we didn't see before.
Yeah, I was just thinking that this week, that it was actually helpful. One of our editors, Andrew Harrison Brown, has yet to come to Florida, has yet to come to the Path of Panther field sites, but that was a huge benefit, actually.
I'll throw in this tiny tidbit as well, but this may just be an obvious thing, but for me, it's worth being reminded over and over again, because just human nature, pride creeps in, and wherever you are, no matter how great of a person you are, I would say that this whole team was really humble and open, listening to feedback, and so that was a huge benefit to the development of the story. And they didn't have to have that posture, but I would say it's so much stronger because of just who you are as individuals, and being open to hearing hard things. And anyway, it's been a great process. So you have a question here in the front.
I do. When we were at the Kaluachuchi Slough Park, it's that state park, there's cameras everywhere.
Oh, Calacoochee Slough, yeah.
Oh, good. So were you able to pull any of that footage? Did you go after that? And if not, why?
Well, that location has research cameras and some professional cameras. A colleague, William Freund at the F-Stop Foundation, has some good cameras in the OK Slough. They're primarily making photographs, and so that the footage that we were some of the first people in Florida anyway to put 4K video cameras in camera trap boxes to produce things that could be at this production standards, and so it was a little bit specialized in that case.
Those cameras are not 4K?
They're probably, well,
there's kind of a whole spectrum of different camera setups, and obviously the most high-end ones are also the most difficult technologically and battery-wise, and for a whole bunch of things. So everything that you see in this film, with the exception of a few moments, is custom-built cameras that Carlton has worked years and years. I mean, he started camera trapping in Gabon in what year?
Like 2001.
So this is like 20 years of camera trap experience going into that. And there's a cool community of people all doing this, but it takes a ton of time and effort. Yeah.
Did you shoot your own drone footage, and what drone did you use?
We mixed up different drones, but the drone footage that is probably like the best of the bunch is from the Inspire drone. It's called the Inspire 2. It's a DJI brand drone. Yep. We did a little Mavic. Yeah. There's some sprinkled in there.
There's even a Phantom 4 Pro clip in there, itty bitty one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Deanna, I know we're getting short on time. I've seen 2 hands, and I'm told there's time for. If we promise to give short answers, can we have 9? Okay.
Okay.
So we'll try to keep the answers brief. But yes, sir. Tell me.
Okay. What it sounds like to me is that you have you just came with this an idea, and then shot a bunch of stuff. And I'm not minimizing that. I'm just shot a bunch of stuff, and then after the fact, you came back and said, okay, well, this is the story that I can pull out of the stuff that I've shot. Is that how this works?
I think so. To a degree, I think we all came in with a certain, kind of set of expectations about what we thought we were doing. But then along the way, we had to revisit all those expectations a bunch of times, and not be too attached to what we thought we were doing versus what the film wanted to be.
Right.
What
there's no like, you don't come in with a shot list and say,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna get a Panther here. I'm gonna get some highway
Right.
stuff here.
Well, it's all.
as much as you could, basically, and
It's all of the above. Like, I think you have every time they came to the big production team came to the field, we had a shot list and we did our best within that context, but it was very iterative throughout the 5 years of production because, so it's not like we shot everything and then 5 years later went and saw what we had. It was, in 2017, we made a 3-minute trailer that cast what we thought the story was in 2017, but that was before the toll roads entered the picture. And so that changes the narrative. And so then you're responding to that, and Eric's riding in the pickup truck with one of the people on the Toll Road Commission, Elton Langford, and he becomes such a vital character from that point forward. And then there's a neurological disorder that pops up on the scene that you can't tell a film about the Florida Panther without addressing it. And then there's a road injured Panther they called Trey, who had 3 broken legs. That how can we not take that moment for the audience to empathize with the animal and the passionate people like Jen and colleagues who are caring for those animals. So it just kind of evolves through and through.
Yeah, pretty much like no other project I've ever worked on. The film ended up telling us a lot about what it was going to be. And it was less about us forcing an idea into a certain shape and kind of hammering it to completion. It was a lot more about the film and certain moments saying, no, you're going to pay attention to this. Like, we're going to throw this curveball at you and you are going to respond. And so we were just really on our toes and tried to be able to respond to those moments.
Great question and great answers. My friend in the back, last question. We got a couple minutes. Yeah.
So, from what I understand about conservation easements in Florida, one of the loopholes for development interests, such as toll roads, is the process of mitigation. And mitigation meaning a biologist usually is hired by private or maybe sponsored interests to review an area, count maybe how many, for example, gopher tortoises may be on it, and then put a price on how to develop that area with this new gopher tortoise count in mind. So this is a loophole into conservation easements, and I wonder if there's any, discussion about this in your summit or in any of the campaign work that y'all have done. Again, so that's mitigation.
Yeah.
Could everyone hear that okay?
You want me to try to give a quick answer on that one? So we don't specifically address the mitigation issue in the film. At the summit, there was certainly there are tracks of special implementation tools that we're talking about all these things. My comment from my like little, somewhat limited knowledge is that mitigation can be a very important tool for conservation, and it can be an abused tool. And so it covers the full spectrum from species mitigation to wetland mitigation. And there's certain places in the Florida Wildlife Corridor where a very above board, well-designed mitigation bank is saving critical land. And it has its place, but it's one of those things that we have to watch out for, so that someone is not, quote, double dipping and getting paid twice for their conservation easement. Okay to be paid for a conservation easement and then later mitigation, as long as the mitigation you're doing is improving habitat beyond what you're paid for the easement. But all those things are nuanced and require a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah, great question, and I think we could probably, talk through the intricacies of that for a long time. And I'm glad you're thinking about it, and I'm glad I'm learning about it. So, there's a lot more work to do. As we wrap up, is there a website or something that the audience can look to where screenings will be, how to get involved with an impact campaign?
Absolutely. We are currently in the process of building out pathofthepanther.com to be the full hub of all things related to the film and screenings, but also a tool to get involved and get engaged across the state. So stay tuned. We also hope to be coming back to this region with more screenings this summer and fall. So keep your eyes open. We're excited to get all of you involved.
And as far as the screening tomorrow night, how many of y'all are coming tomorrow night screening? Okay.
Standby. It's on standby only now.
Yeah, it is on standby. So I've been told that it is not a sure thing that you'll get in if you stand by, but there probably will be some seats opening. So I don't want to give you false hope.
But it's worth showing up to see.
Deanna's shaking her head. She's saying no.
Okay.
It's full. But
All
we
right.
will bring this thing around the state this fall, and hopefully it'll be on a high-profile streaming platform by the end of the year, early next year. So,
Great work, everybody. And thank you to the audience, everyone, for taking time in your day to come and enjoy the new Winter Park Library. This is our first time here, so it's good to see everyone. Thank you to the filmmakers. You've done an incredible job. It's just an honor to get to stand with you in this, and your professionalism and your heart and everything you'd want in a partner, and somebody that you just you need to trust. Like, you guys embody this. So for anyone who's listening or cares, like, this is a team worth paying attention to. So support them however you can.
Thank you, Ted.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.